Hey there, I'm Kat, and this is Brews and Reviews. In today's video, I'm going to be doing a recap of Iron Flame by Rebecca Yarros. So this is for any of you who are about to pick up Onyx Storm and you don't remember what happened in Iron Flame. I read it yesterday, it's in my head, let's go. Also, spoilers for Fourth Wing. If you've not read that one, then you should probably not watch this video, and if you just want a little recap of what happened, I'll leave a link to the recap video I made for that one in the description below. So we pick up from pretty much exactly where we left off at the end of Fourth Wing, with Xaden and Violet in Arisha, which is the home of the Rebellion. The Rebellion are led by committee. Notable members include Brennan, who is Violet's brother, and Xaden, and they have a big debate on whether they should let the cadets go back to Basgiath or whether that will put everyone in more danger or not. Xaden decides to take responsibility for Violet and says, listen, if she does anything, then it's on me, all the punishment comes to me. They realize they do actually have to go back to Basgiath because they still need to be able to acquire weapons, and they have about 6 months until the Venin are actually able to invade Navarre, and they'll sort of be overrun, it'll be too late. Also, before we go back to Basgiath, we get to see Andana, who is now twice the size, she's a moody teenager, and she is a black dragon. Everyone who was at Ressen flies back to Basgiath, and before anything else, Violet manages to sneak into Liam's room and save all of the letters that he wrote for his little sister before everything gets burned. When it comes time for formation and the reading of the death roll, their names are all on it, and they're like, well, this is awkward, we're still alive, and everyone's like, how are you still alive? And then Dane comes over and Violet's like, touch me and I'll chop your hands off. Xaden also calls out Colonel Atos, who is the guy that sent them to Athbeen, basically to die, but they do keep the Venom part of what happened in Ressen a secret. Xaden also deeply implies that he and Violet are together and Dane should back off, and it's kind of a way to get Violet to distance from Dane publicly, because now Violet has a lot of memories that if Dane saw them, it would be very, very bad for the Rebellion. It's also graduation day, so Xaden graduates because he was in his 3rd year, and Violet becomes the 2nd year. Xaden is made a lieutenant and sent away to somewhere called Samara, which is on the southern wing and is on the front line. Xaden and Violet are given this sort of special permissions leave where they're allowed to see each other every 7 days, except like one of them goes on leave to go and see the other. So they technically get 1 day of leave every 14 days, and that's really hard for their dragons because they are mated and they don't really want to be apart for more than 3 days, and it gets like really uncomfortable for them and makes them angry and depressed. We're also introduced to the new vice commandant, who's a guy called Major Varish, and instantly gives off really creepy, really weird vibes. Colonel Atos is shipped off because Violet's mother did not enjoy that her daughter almost died because of his actions. He does leave them with a parting threat saying that people have to keep secrets if they're dead. So Xaden leaves, Dane becomes the new wing leader of Fourth Wing. Nobody's happy about that. But Rhiannon becomes the squad leader. 89 people made it through 1st year, and even fewer dragons are deciding to bond this next year, so only 91 dragons have decided to bond with new riders. The 2nd years have to take a new class, which is called the Rider Survival Course, or RSC for short, and it's essentially how to survive if you get separated from your dragon, but also involves things like working with the infantry, being kidnapped and interrogated, torture, you know, all the usual stuff. Meanwhile, Violet decides that she's going to use her access to the archives to try and find some information about the wards, because there is a potential ward that they could set up in Arisha if they can figure out the magic. On conscription day, Violet recognizes one of the 1st years as a guy called Cam, but he's going by the name Arik. She knows him from her past, but we don't get to figure out why just yet. She also meets Sloane, who is Liam's younger sister, and Sloane immediately hates Violet, but Violet's like, this is what you need to do to get across the parapet, put your hair up, be careful, do all these different things, and Sloane reluctantly takes the advice just because, you know, she doesn't want to die on the parapet, and she does make it across even though 71 other candidates don't. Sloane gets switched into 2nd squad, which is where Violet is, and she refuses, but Imogen makes it do it. And then when it comes time for the dragons to incinerate anybody that decides to run, some people decide to run, and Major Varish's orange dragon waits a little bit late and sets fire to a lot of 2nd years as well. Violet just manages to warn a few people, she grabs Sloane, they hit the deck, and everyone that listens to her lives, but some people do not. In fact, one of the people that dies is Kieran, who was in Ressen, and part of the only reason that Violet survived is because of the dragon scale armor that she's wearing. Ten is noticeably quite pissed about this, shows up and threatens Major Varish's dragon Solus. So Violet's made herself a nice new enemy there. Violet decides to start running because she's kind of running from the dreams and the problems that she's been having since Ressen. She just keeps imagining Liam dying and everybody else dying, because Venin is scary. Next up they have Battle Brief, where they go over what happened in Athbeen, and it's a complete lie, utter fabrication of what actually happened. Rhiannon has also noticed that there are some strange things happening, specifically in the healer's quadrant, as Nolan, who is a mender that often heals Violet, has been looking really tired and like he's drained of all of his power and that sort of thing, and it's all very secretive. Then comes a sparring assessment for the 1st years, and there is this one really beefy 1st year decides to challenge Violet, and he assassinates Nadine for saying, oh yes, I'm Violet Sorrengale, in a mocking way, because he thought she actually was. Violet does manage to win the fight and kill this guy, and basically says that Colonel Atos is trying to assassinate her and the other people that were in Ressen. They also find out that Sloane is not a fighter and is just really not very good at sparring at all. For Xaden's first visit, he turns up in her room. He's warded it now so that the only people that can get in her room are her, him, and anybody that she is physically touching as she brings into the room. They have a little bit of a heart-to-heart because Violet is not feeling good about witnessing all these first years dying, and Xaden basically says it's about desensitizing you to death. Second year is where a lot of people lose their humanity. It's not a good time. He can't stay long, but he hands her a letter because he's determined to try and convince her that he will be open with her. So he's like, I'll write things down for you so you can learn more about my life, even though we're not together right now. Now Violet uses her free time to go and see Jacinia, who is a friend of hers that works in the archives, and they start working together on trying to find books about wards. Violet says it's because she's doing something for a class, but Jacinia definitely doesn't believe her, but she does it anyway. Professor Kaori, who is the professor of dragonkind, happens to notice that there is a new black dragon, but they don't really know anything about it. And all of the dragons are trying to keep Andana's new form secret because she needs to go into the dreamless sleep, which is basically like growing time for dragons. She just has a big old nap for a couple of months and then she'll be like fully developed as an adult dragon. So Violet has to kind of keep a secret and say, well, she's not coming around for a while, and oh, I don't know anything about these black dragons. Beats me. Unfortunately, Major Varish is there and he decides he wants to see Andana within the week. He says that she must turn up for these new flight drills or else he's gonna punish Violet. And Violet knows Andana can't be there because she's in this dreamless sleep, but she can't say anything about it because the dragons want to keep the dreamless sleep a secret. Meanwhile, over the next couple of days, somebody tries to assassinate Bodhi, Imogen, and Aya, who are all people that were there at Ressen. By the time Violet's leave rolls around, she's allowed to go and see Xaden in Samara, but Varish stops her and starts searching her bag, and she's like, okay, well, there's nothing in there, so okay, bye. But Ten had all of the secret things that Bodhi had sort of attached to his saddle, so they didn't get found. When she gets there, she finds Xaden having the sort of pit fight that everybody's betting on to try and get access to the leave pass because he obviously wants to spend time with Violet. Xaden wins, they go back to his room, they have a little kiss, but Violet's like, no, we're not gonna have sex. We'll have a kiss, but we'll not have sex. And Xaden's okay with that because he's like, I will work for your love. I'm gonna earn it and I'm gonna earn your trust back. And then they start talking about the venom killing weapons because Violet doesn't really know very much about that. And Xaden admits they're made from the same material that power the wards, which is an alloy that is capable of holding power, but it must be imbued with that power first. They start practicing some more on her mental shields because Violet needs to be able to keep out interrogators and Dane, because if anybody goes rooting around in her memory, then it's gonna be a bad time for everyone. Violet doesn't produce Andana for Varish, the next training session she has, and she gets punished by Car and Varish. They basically force her to use her power over and over again until she burns out. She ends up doing 41 strikes of lightning in an hour, and Ten drops her in a river to cool her down because otherwise she was going to burn up from the inside and it would just be very unpleasant. Ten says he's going to take care of it because what Varish is doing to Violet is not okay. Meanwhile, Jacinia and Violet meet up and talk about books, and they see this guy getting dragged away because he made the wrong request from the scribes, and his request was found to be treasonous and he gets beaten to death. So Violet realizes her research is much more dangerous than she suspected, and she has to kind of open up to Jacinia a little bit better because Jacinia is the only reason that she's not already been dragged away, because she didn't record everything because it was Violet. Violet and the rest of Fourth Wing get kidnapped on their way to physics class and get dumped in a forest because, surprise, it's RSC time. They get given a drink of water, which nullifies their ability to wield and talk to their dragons, so they're basically cut off from everything. They're just normal people right now. Fourth Wing are teamed up with the 4th Squad Infantry, and they're told to do a joint land navigation exercise where they are given 2 maps and told to work together to get to a certain point. They're up against another team whose rival dragons are definitely hunting them. The 2 squads do a lot of dick measuring, everybody's fighting against each other, that I'm better than you think you're better than me, let's not do this. Until they finally realize that the 2 maps that they've been given are 2 different maps, so they've been going in 2 different directions the whole time. Until they bump into a dragon, Bade. Jack Barlow's old dragon. It gets very dangerous for everyone, and then one of the infantry run, a rider stops them, but the rider gets incinerated instead of the infantry person. Rhiannon starts to get really suspicious that Violet is keeping secrets because she's been avoiding every one of her friends and she's just been hanging out with the marked ones who were in Ressen with her. And Rhiannon doesn't push, but she's like, please open up to me, I'm here for you when you do. Violet goes back to Jacinia and asks for any books on how the first 6 riders built the wards. Back in sparring challenges, Arik wins his battle quite easily, but Sloane is not doing well in hers, so Violet has to kind of cheat and use her poison to help Sloane. Sloane isn't happy about this, but Violet is done taking her shit, and she's like, listen, if you train with Imogen to get better at fighting, like you really should be, and you're being too stubborn not to, I will give you a letter a week from Liam. Obviously Sloane isn't super happy about the extortion of it all, but she does it because she really wants those letters. In their next battle briefing, they hear about a border notice that has been popping up saying there's been an increased number of border crossings and that anybody trying trying to cross the border should be immediately killed. This obviously infuriates Violet because she knows what people are actually running from and that Navarre is not letting these people be refugees inside their wards. The next flight maneuvers class, Varish again is like, where's Andana? Uh-oh, you get to be punished now. So Ten grabs hold of Varish's dragon's neck and says, I will chomp down. You don't give dragons orders. Leave her alone. She doesn't get punished because of what the dragons have decided. Eventually Varish gives up because if his dragon dies, he dies, and he's forced to apologize to Violet, but she knows that she's made a lifetime enemy right there. Then Violet gets to go on another trip to Samara, where Xaden's like, listen, if you want to come to my room tonight, then you have to kiss me right now. And she's like, okay. And it turns out Violet's sister Mira is in Samara, and she's been stationed there. Violet has a moment with her sister, and she kind of tries to talk to her about the wards and about like what else is out there, perhaps like wyverns. And Mira's like, have you not had enough sleep because you're talking about fairy tales? That's ridiculous. So Violet's like, oh, okay, not going there. But Mira does explain that the wards that are in the outposts are like extensions of the main ward, so they're like strings that have been pulled extra tight rather than the main part of the ward, and if the strings were to snap, then the ward would rebound back into a smaller area. Later that night, Violet is talking to Xaden, and he tells her that the alloy is made out of palladium, some other ores, and dragon eggshells. They also received news that there was an attack on the eastern wing, and Mason was killed, who was another person who was there at Ressen. There is now only 6 people who were at Ressen that are still alive. In history class, they discuss the history of Navarre, which Violet knows to be almost all a fabrication, but they discuss sacrifices and what is worth sacrificing for the safety of a certain group of people, and what will be lost in doing so. Dane decides to challenge Violet to a sparring match even though she's still a bit injured, simply because he wants to talk to her and she has been avoiding him like the plague. And he tells Violet that the 107 scars that were carved onto Xaden's back were done by her mother. Rhiannon starts to put together all of these assassination attempts on everybody who was in Ressen, and she starts asking who killed Day, which was Liam's dragon, because she doesn't believe it was Griffin's. Violet doesn't tell, but when she's alone with Arik, he reveals that he knows what's going on as well, because Arik is actually the 3rd son of the king, so he is privy to a lot of information that others aren't. Violet decides to sneak out and look at the forge, but on her way she is kidnapped for another RSC surprise. She's locked in a room with Rhiannon, Sawyer, and Riddick, and they're told, have a drink now, because this is going to be an assessment interrogation. And we're going to see how well you hold up. We've given you all a secret, you have to keep the secret, but we're going to try and make you tell the secret. And also if you can escape, then you get a special patch for it. Violet realizes that the water that they've been given is going to nullify their power again, so she's like, don't drink it, so you can stay connected to your power and your dragons. They manage to last through a lot of interrogation, and Varish turns up and starts to get impatient. So he brings in Dane and says, you should use your power on Violet and get some information out of her because, you know, you might as well practice. And Dane pulls out his rulebook and says, no, I refuse to do that, that's not okay. So the Mender Nolan comes in to heal her because she's not doing well right now, and he leaves a window open on his way out. So Violet, Rhys, Sawyer, and Riddick manage to escape from the first room of the torture chamber. They get their weapons back, and one of Violet's weapons opens the door. She doesn't quite know why, but it does. And they manage to be the only squad that has escaped from this interrogation assessment. In the next battle brief, there's another sort of notice that says that Zolia, which is a place where the Griffin Flyer school is, has been completely destroyed by blue fire dragons. The notice was printed in Navarre, but it wasn't an official scribe's notice, so there's debate on whether it's real or not. Of course, the battle briefing professors say, well, it's propaganda, you're all just rubbish at identifying it, and he becomes very convincing about that. But this is quickly forgotten as he says, oh, guess what? We've brought someone back. We've managed to heal them. It's Jack Barlow. Jack Barlow's alive. Here he is. And Violet is immediately shitting her pants because he spent the entire last year trying to kill her. Then they start talking about an attack that happened in Samara the previous night where one rider was grievously injured, and one of the professors hints that it might be Xaden, so Violet just immediately leaves. She just gets on 10, they get out of there and they go and see him. And when they get there, they find that he's just fine. He's sparring with his cousin, and he has a scar on his arm that basically looks like his arm would have been torn off if it hadn't been mended in time. But he's fine now. They decide that they're allowed to have horny sex again, so they do, and then they go off to drop some daggers off to the Griffin Flyers. And while they're there, Violet meets this girl called Kat, who is Xaden's ex. They also have a discussion about how they need to acquire a luminary, and the only person that has one is Viscount Takaris, but he is only willing to hit them out if he can watch Violet use her power, because he is a power hoarder, think the Collector from Marvel. Violet has to go back to Basgiath, and immediately Varish is like, time to be punished, you went away without leave, naughty naughty. But Professor Kaori intervenes and says she didn't have any power over that because it's to do with the dragons and their mate bond, and she can't say no to that. So she's been immediately cleared of all charges and you can't punish her, which Varish is very mad about. Violet did have a dagger that Xaden had given her, and Varish started searching her clothes, and she was saved by Rhiannon, who summoned the dagger from Violet's jacket into her room. So she stopped Violet from being found out that way. And now Violet finally opens up to Rhiannon, Sawyer and Riddick and tells them everything that happened. Imogen also opens up to Quinn because of this. Because of opening up, she finds out that there were 6 journals that were written by the original 6 writers, and some of them might be in the archives hidden in sub-level vaults. Xaden and Violet are kind of kept apart. Every time that they go and see each other, they're either interrupted or they are kept apart while their dragons are allowed to be together, so things aren't really going very well for them. And Andana is still asleep, and she's been asleep for longer than is expected, and people are starting to get a bit worried. At Threshing, Arik and Sloane manage to bond dragons, and Violet is put on duty that night. She goes up to the top of the tower to stand by the fire, and Aya is there. Then 4 assassins jump out of nowhere and murder Aya and try and murder Violet. One of them throws her off the side of the building, and she just manages to hang on, and then Jack Barlow saves her. He skewers the other guy and throws him off, and then helps her up, and it's all very confusing. Riddick comes from meeting Jacinia, and he finds out that there are 2 journals in the archives, but they're in the royal vault, so they need someone of royal blood. But luckily enough for them, Arik, their first year, is of royal blood, so all they need to do is get him involved. The group pull a heist where they do manage to steal both of the journals just in time before they get sealed in with the archives. Xaden was also part of the heist, and he takes one of the journals to Brennan so he can start working that out and they can start working out the other journal. But Violet is subsequently drugged by Nolan and Varish kidnaps her. It's interrogation time for Violet, and they have a truthsayer who can tell whether Violet is lying or not. So she creates a lot of half-truths, and she's trying to keep the actual truth to herself. As they start breaking her fingers, her arms, her ankles, it's torture central. She still manages to say nothing. Varish is pretty mad by this because it turns out his signet is being able to see other people's weaknesses, and when he looked at her, all he could see were the people that she loved as her weakness. He is also using Violet for bait because he really wants to get Xaden, and she's like, okay, cool, but how does your dragon like hiding because Tan's gonna murder him? And he doesn't like that at all. Violet starts to hallucinate Liam, and it helps to keep her sane in amongst the torture. They bring Dane to the interrogation room to try and force the information out of her, and Violet's like, oh my god, I can't hold it back. They've made me drink this thing that keeps me away from Tan. And instead of letting him see the information that he actually wants to know, she pumps the memory of Ressen and what happened there with all of the marked ones and the venom into his head, along with like all the pain and like the fear and all that sort of stuff that she's been feeling. So Dane sort of recoils. Meanwhile, all the leadership has been summoned because something is going on in the wider world, and then Dane stabs Varish and starts to free Violet because he's like, okay, can't have any of this. This is bad. Xaden appears and helps Violet kill Varish. My god, that guy needed to die. And Xaden also says, fuck everything else. I love you. Of course I was coming to get you. Everything else can get stuff. General Sorrengail appears and she's like, I just want to have a word with my daughter. She gives Violet the antidote to the dragon haze drug thing that she's been having. And she also admits that Xaden created a distraction by dropping a bunch of Wyvern bodies on all of the outposts. So now the leadership is scrambling to try and keep that a secret. She also tells Violet that she forced her into the Riders Quadrant because she knew that if Violet became a scribe, then she would have had to take over the secret keeping and all of the lies and deception, and Violet would never do that. So she was like, at least you have a chance if you're a rider, whereas if you're a scribe you'd just be killed as soon as you started to descend. Also, when she made the deal with Xaden and put those marks on his back, she added on that he had to owe her a favor, and she claimed that favor the previous year to keep Violet alive. Then they go back up, Dane calls a formation, they explain everything to every one of the riders, and they're like, listen, we'll give you the option. If you want to come with us and fight the real fight, then you can. If you don't, you can stay here, but we've given you the option. 200 dragons and 101 riders end up leaving Basgiath, and they go to Orisha and stay in Ryerson House. Brennan mends Violet because she is not doing well, and the assembly continue to argue about trusting Violet. When she's fully healed, Violet finds out that Andana is now awake. She is Black Dragon, she's a scorpion tail, but something went wrong in her dreamless sleep. Presumably because she was forced to grow up so quickly, part of her wings didn't develop, so she can't actually stretch her wings and fly. The dragon elders think that she will be able to fly eventually, but she will never be able to carry a rider. Violet begins translating the journal that they did manage to get to Brennan, and she thinks it has something to do with blood magic and needing the blood of the 6 most powerful riders. Meanwhile, a riot of 40 dragons appears, and they're led by Mira, and they've come to join the fight. Because as soon as they saw the Wyvern, Mira was like, oh, I see what Violet was trying to tell me now. Oops. Mira is reunited with Brennan and immediately punches him, and they have a nice little sibling fight. Yay! Violet tries to use the blood of the 6 most powerful riders on the ward stone to try and activate the ward, and it doesn't work. Then a guy called Felix tries to help Violet with her magic because Violet still has no aim. And he's like, you're just throwing lightning out there. How have you not killed anyone yet? This is mad. And he gives her a conduit to try and channel some of the power into and to help her direct it a little bit. Brennan, Mira, and Violet sneak off to Takaris where the Viscount is to try and get the Luminary. By the time they get there, Xaden is already there and he is pissed. Also, they find out that Kat, Xaden's ex-girlfriend, is the niece of the Viscount. And it turns out she has the power to heighten emotion, which really heightens Violet's jealousy. The next day, Violet ends up having to showcase her power in this really strange arena. Viscount says, okay, well, you go down into that pit there and you destroy this chest that used to belong to Xaden's dad. Don't step out of that circle until you're done. and then I'll hear you out about the luminary. Also, Xaden's not allowed to go in and help at any point in time or else they forfeit the challenge. So Violet's like, okay, I've got this. And then a venom pops out of the chest, immediately kills some guards. It's raining, so she manages to enlist Tern's help to lift her up just before she electrocutes the ground and kills the venom. Also during that fight, Mira learned that she could use her shield power away from the wards, as she just managed to stop their power from being sucked away. Xaden's really mad that they got tricked into this and almost kills Viscount Takaris, but they do end up making a deal in exchange for a lot of weapons and taking 100 Griffin riders back with them to Orisha. Now the path to Orisha is over some really tall mountains and Griffins can't handle high altitudes, so they have to take this really perilous path through the mountain that is designed to kill Griffins. It's essentially like the Gauntlet, except full of traps that are designed to kill Griffins. The dragons have to sort of fly by and everybody else has to hike, which Violet doesn't love because her knees are not great with hiking. They come across an obstacle which they can't disarm, which is like a trigger trap that has arrows that fly out and will obviously skewer someone if they trigger it. So they have to jump over this like small chasm. But Violet and there's a Griffin flyer called Luella are small and aren't very likely to be able to do it. So they come up with a plan to have Riddick climb up, smash a sword into the side so that they can grab hold of it and use it to swing across. Violet manages to make it and Luella almost does, but she stumbles and she ends up knocking Violet and Vicia over. She triggers the trap, Riddick gets shot with some arrows and Violet is holding on to both Luella and Vicia, and then Luella slips and Violet's arm dislocates and she can't save her. Brennan appears just in time to mend Riddick and Kat starts getting really angry and she's like, you dropped the Griffin flyer and you saved a rider, of course you did, that's exactly who you are. And then we find out that Griffins die if their flyers die, so Luella's Griffin starts to die and then a Wyvern comes out of nowhere and snatches it away. They're being attacked by a Wyvern and Violet manages to get on Tern's back and use the cloud cover that is around them to manipulate her lightning and target the Wyvern specifically, and she manages to save them. Everybody gets across. Unfortunately, the collective consciousness nature of the Wyvern means that the Venom who created them is now aware that they are where they are. Everybody does make it back to Orisha though, and the flyers and the riders start training together. Professor Trissa starts training everyone on runes and how they can be imbued with power to do certain things. But the things that they can do, how long they last, when they should be activated, when they expire, all of that is figured out at the imbuing stage. And at this point Violet realizes that the daggers that Xaden gave her have runes on them and are imbued with certain things, including the one that helped her unlock a door earlier in the book. Runes are also especially useful as they can be used by people who can't even use lesser magic, so they can be used by anyone. The riders and the flyers are really not getting along, so everyone decides to do this one time spar to get out your grievances session, and anyone can challenge anyone. So naturally Kat challenges Violet because Kat is still hung up on Xaden, and she starts manipulating Violet's emotions to try and heighten her jealousy and her anger, and starts saying some stuff like, I had him first, aren't you jealous, blah blah blah, I taught him loads of things. And Violet is really jealous and pissed and almost kills Kat, but Xaden says, listen, I don't care if you kill her, but I know you're gonna care, so maybe you should stop. And then she stops, and then they go off to a room together, and Xaden's like, listen, I only care about you, I do not care about that woman, I never loved that woman, she is just a lady that I was forced to be betrothed to because it made sense when we were younger, and like, I don't care, and we are incompatible with each other. Violet's still kind of like insecure about herself, and anyway they do some oral sex in his throne, and he's like, are you reassured now? Let's have sex later, this is just about you, so we'll have sex later. But that was good, right? And she very much enjoyed that. Also, he tells her that one of the daggers that he gave her has runes that will offset Kat's power, so as long as she's wearing the dagger, then Kat can't affect her. Which he is really glad about, because Kat's squad is then absorbed into Fourth Wing and they become one squad. So she has to deal with her a lot more often. Now Violet continues with her training with Felix, and she also asks Dane to help her translate the journal because he is more of an expert in the language than she is. Meanwhile, Venom are strategically taking fortresses and cities, and they're getting slowly closer to them, so they know that they're coming for them. When the Venom take another town, Xaden was there and he managed to kill a Venom, but he is really not very happy about it because most of the town was destroyed and the town was 5 times the size of Ressen, so lots of innocent people died. Also, Mira called the fight a loss when Xaden almost died, and she realized that if Xaden died, then Violet would be completely useless to them because of her grief. So he realizes how babied she must have felt by everyone saying, well, we're gonna keep you safe because Xaden will die. And they eat chocolate cake while he's sad and talking about how outnumbered they are, and they are basically 50 years too late to actually win this fight. Violet figures out what is needed to charge the wards, but then she starts thinking she's not sure if she could. She talks to Rhiannon about it, and then they bring it to the rest of their wing. Because if they charge the wards, then the Griffin Flyers won't be able to channel their magic. But they do come up with a solution that will not leave them completely defenseless, and it's by creating Mayorsight arrowheads that can be imbued with power and can be used as like projectile explosives. Violet has this dream where this Venin is talking to her and keeps talking about how he wants to steal her power, and she keeps having these dreams throughout the book, and then she forgets about them and sort of thinks that they're a nightmare. The new second squad ends up going on a rune hunting mission where they have to find these summoning runes, and Violet's in a team with Sloane, Kat, and Vicia. They go into a cave and find Varish's old dragon Solus, who is waiting for them. Solus immediately kills Vicia, and Andana appears and stands in front of the others to absorb the fire that is being breathed on them because Andana is fireproof. Andana gets hurt in the fight, Sloane's power manifests, and her signet is revealed to be a siphon, just like Naolin, who was Ted's previous rider. And that essentially means that she can take power from other people. They manage to get out of the cave, and Andana comes out having killed Solus. Later that night, Xaden and Violet have another "why aren't you talking to me and telling me things" chat, because this whole book he has been saying to her, well, if you ask me the questions, I'll answer them. And she's like, I'm sick of trying to ask you the right question. And he says, are we gonna finally have this conversation about what your mother told you? And she's like, yeah, why don't we have a conversation about that? She starts to doubt him a little bit, and then she says, hang on a second, why don't I ask you what your second signet is? And he goes absolutely white as a ghost because he has never told anyone about that, and he's like, I didn't think you'd ever ask me about that because I've not told anyone about that. And then he doesn't tell her what it is. The reason Violet was able to figure it out is because Sigel was bonded to his grandfather, and Vicia was having a conversation earlier about how second signets can develop in people who have had dragons that have bonded with other members of their family, and it usually results in a second signet or them going insane. And Xaden's not insane. They get a report that a large number of wyverns are coming, and they raise the wards using the fire of the 6 most powerful dragon. And then they fly away from everyone else to be alone, and Xaden reveals that he's an intrinsic, not a full intrinsic, which is mind reading everybody all the time and certain to make you go a bit crazy, but he's like an intentions intrinsic, which is really hard to say, by the way. So he can read everyone's intentions, and that is how he's always been able to trust whether someone has been like telling the truth or like what they're planning to do with certain information. That's why he was able to trust Violet in Fourth Wing when she said she wasn't going to tell anyone about the meeting of the marked ones. So Violet immediately feels betrayed because she has no idea when he might have used this power on her, what he's manipulated in her potentially to get her to fall in love with him, and she's like, oh my god, I feel so betrayed. And so does Ten, because Sigel never told him. They don't really have time to dwell on this because hundreds of women appear and then immediately come into contact with the wards, and they fall down and die. So the Venin retreat, and everyone's like, phew, that was great, especially as the sage that was in Reston is also there. When they get back to Orisha though, they realise they have 2 problems. One is that General Melgren wants to meet, and 2 is that the Griffin Flyers can still wield, which means that the wards aren't properly up. There is something wrong with what she did. So the rebel leadership and the leadership of Navarre meet each other in Athbeen, and General Melgren, who has the power of foresight, says, look, they're coming to us at Samara and they're going to attack full force there, and if you don't come, we lose. So you have to come. And everybody says no, but Violet's like, oh, are we really going to leave everybody in Navarre to be overrun by them? If that ward breaks, then they get full access to it. And they leave that leadership meeting, and Violet thinks about it some more and realizes that actually the ward wouldn't fail if they attacked at Samara. What would happen is that the ward would just snap back to a smaller circle, so it wouldn't fail entirely like Melgren was implying. Now, before they leave, General Sorrengail has a conversation with them because it's the first time she's seen Brennan finding out that he is alive since she thought he died. And she gives them the other journal that Violet had and was taken from her, and said that the journal that they have has a lie in it, so this one should be the truth. They leave and they find out that the wyvern that they destroyed with the barrier actually just reanimate because they have these onyx runes inside of them. Xaden and Violet meet again, they fight with each other, but then they decide, listen, no more secrets. There are no secrets between us anymore. This is it. That's it. No more of that, or else I can't take it anymore. Then they have another battle brief where they discuss how Melgren was bluffing, and it's not in fact Samara that will be where everything falls. Because they remember he can't see anything where the marked ones are, so wherever they are, he's not been able to see what is really happening. And Violet realizes that actually the Venin are going to be targeting Basgaeth, where the wardstone that is powering all of the wards around Navarre is. Now the Assembly say no, we're not going to go and help them, that's ridiculous, but they go to fight anyway. The Flyers have to stay because they're not fast enough to compete with the dragon, but some of them give Violet their Meosite exploding arrows, and they head back to Basgaeth. They land there, and Violet's task is to convince General Sorrengail to let them see the wards. They manage to make it into the wards just in time to see Jack Barlow and his dragon Bade set the wardstone on fire, because he promised he would. Then he kills his own dragon and breaks the wardstone. So all the wards around Navarre fall. Because it turns out that Jack Barlow is Venin, and he has been since before he and Violet fought on the mat in Fourth Wing. Dane manages to see inside Jack's memories before Xaden knocks him out, and he reveals that they're going to be overwhelmed. There are 2 huge waves of wyvern and their dark wielders coming for them. They enlist the help of the infantry to go and find the laws that Jack set up that will draw the Venin to the Vale, and General Sorrengail starts to set up a defensive barrier where everybody has sections that they are required to fight in, and they ignore anything that isn't in their section. And Violet tries to convince her that they shouldn't abandon the wardstone because there could still be something they can do with it, but she's overruled. cold. Thankfully, Brennan and everybody else that got left behind, including the Griffin Flyers, show up and say, listen, we realized we've made a mistake as soon as you left, and now we're here to help. Now everyone in Basgiath is armed with what they need to take down Venin. Violet sends Brennan off to mend the wardstone because it's better than just leaving it there, and then the fighting begins for everybody else. The battle rages with these Wyvern that can breathe green fire, and everybody is in trouble, but Violet has to sort of trust them to do their job, so she has to sort of stay away from it. Venin manages to get on the back of Ten, and Violet's like, oh no, not again, because Rhiannon jumps onto Ten's back and manages to fight the Venin. Ten does a roll, and Violet manages to catch Rhiannon's leg, so she keeps her on, but the Venin falls off, so she manages to save Rhiannon. Then Rhiannon goes back to her own dragon. Sawyer and his dragon Sleeg get attacked by 4 Venin at once. Sawyer gets his leg bitten off, and Sleeg won't fight back. They think that they'll lose Sawyer, so Violet jumps onto Sleeg's back, takes Sawyer so that Sleeg is free to fight again, then jumps off of Sleeg's back, and Ten manages to catch both of them, and Ten is pissed because he's like, don't ever do that again, well, that was so risky. And Violet's like, listen, they're both alive, so that worked. She takes Sawyer to the ground where the Griffin Flyers are sort of ferrying everybody to the healers, and Cat gives Violet one of her daggers. A Dark Wielder lands in the courtyard behind her, and Violet's like, oh fuck. But she doesn't make a big deal out of it because Cat was just about to walk away, but Cat comes back and they sort of work together to try and get this Venin. She manages to kill one, but another really strong Dark Wielder comes for her. Andana rises up from where she has been hiding and breathes fire and kills him though. Jacinia the scribe, who has been trying to translate the last bit of this other journal, has managed to figure out what the difference is between the two journals, and it's not that they needed the fire of 6 dragons, it's that they needed fire of 7 dragons. And that's really confusing because there are only 6 dragon types that they know of. The leadership of Navarre have all turned up and now they're all fighting with each other, and Violet's like, I know how to fix the wards if you let me, and Xaden manages to convince them to listen to her. Unfortunately, the sage from Resson is there, and it turns out he's not a sage, he's a general, which is like the highest rank of Venin. Violet talks to Xaden before she goes off to do the wards and says, listen, I think there's only enough power to do 1 ward here or Orisha, which one would you pick? And he says, anywhere you are is where we're gonna pick, and you're here, so we're gonna pick Basgiath. So Violet starts talking to Code, who is General Melgren's dragon, and he is the largest black dragon in existence. And she says, will you come and use your fire on this ward because I need you? And everyone's like, well, you've got Andana to be the black dragon, you don't need Coda. But Violet talks to Coda and says, listen, I know you keep secrets for dragonkind and it's not my place to ruin any of that, so can you please come? And Coda agrees. Now Ten and Xaden go off to fight the general, while Violet and Andana have a conversation about how Andana isn't actually a black dragon, she just looks like one right now because she wanted to look like Ten. And she actually waited 650 years to be hatched because she waited for Violet, and Violet's like, well, how would you know that I was going to be this person you expected? And she's like, did. And it turns out that Andana is actually a 7th type of dragon. We don't get any more information about that right now. But Violet goes to the wardstone and realizes it needs to be imbued with power, and it will take a long time to imbue it. So she just keeps pouring her power into the wardstone. Even when Ten and Xaden and everyone are screaming at her to stop, she just keeps pouring in. She's like, if they survive, you've just got to live without me. You've just got to keep going. This is the only way it can be done. And then General Sorrengail kicks her, so she goes flying and gets cut off from the transfer of power. Now, while Brennan is mending Violet, General Sorrengail says to Sloane, listen, you've got to do this, and Sloane uses her siphoning power to siphon all of the power from General Sorrengail, who then dies, but the wardstone is repaired and imbued with enough magic to start working as soon as the dragons breathe fire on it. So now the wards are back up, the Venin are scrambling, and they all leave, and Ten tells Violet that Xaden needs her, so she goes outside and she's like, what happened? And Xaden reveals that he killed the Venin, but there's a problem. To do it, Xaden had to become a Venin, and he had to use power that he never should have. The book ends with Xaden waking up, going to see Jack Barlow in the dungeon and saying, is there a cure for this? Because there needs to be a cure for this. And Jack's like, no. Welcome, brother. And honestly, fuck Jack Barlow. So there we have it. That is my recap of Iron Flame. I'm sorry that this is long. This was more detailed than I expected it to be, but here we are. So I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, please leave a like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!